Sure. So I'll take a new topic today, and the topic would be mid server. See, like when we were doing the import from different data sources, like XML or Excel or CSV or any database, let's think about the database scenario where we had a remote server, remote database server, and then using our ServiceNow instance, we were trying to access this database server and get data from this server to ServiceNow instance. Okay? Now let's twist the scenario a little bit. This server was publicly accessible. This is what we assumed earlier. The server was publicly accessible. So anybody could access the server by using its IP address and by accessing particular ports, right? But what if I say that I am putting this server behind a firewall, right? I'll simply go ahead and put a firewall which will prevent direct access of this will prevent direct access of this server from the outside world. Meaning, now for connecting to database server, you have to first negotiate with this firewall, right? And if you are able to do that, if you are able to negotiate it, then only you will be given access to the server like this, right? To understand it more beautifully, what we can consider is think from the perspective that this database server is within an IT enterprise, and this is circumference within LAN or WAN of an IT enterprise, any company. So we are assuming that this database server is part of, this is one of the servers in the IT enterprises LAN or WAN. So and that IT enterprise has its own firewall, etc. Right? So the firewall we draw actually is outside it. Here is the firewall. Right? And there could be different servers. There could be this server, this server. There are number of servers within this IT enterprise. They have a LAN with hundreds of servers, hundreds of database or application servers. Okay? And within this, from this LAN, you have to access the database server, which is this one, right? But there is a firewall, so you cannot directly access. ServiceNow cannot directly access anything within the firewall, behind the firewall, right? Because you have masked it. So in such scenarios, how would you access the database server or any resource from within the enterprise, right? So typical solution to that is a mid server, right? A mid server will be kind of a server here within the enterprise. I'm sorry. It will be kept somewhere here, right? And this web server will be connected to your instance. It will bypass it will actually have access to the firewall, and it will then connect your, you know, private servers to the ServiceNow instance, something like that, right? So mid server is basically so it's a combination of software and hardware. It's not just hardware; it's a combination of software and hardware, right? So, and mid server stands for management, instrumentation, and discovery. M from this management, I from instrumentation, and D for discovery. Okay, and mid server is basically software plus hardware, right? Now the hardware, we have some specification for the hardware. You have to have a particular, software, particular hardware where the mid server software will also be installed, right? So you have a specific system needs, some RAM, some memory, some processing capability, some processors, etc., that you have to have on the server, and you can install this server, this software, mid server software, which is actually a Java program. So this software is a Java program released by ServiceNow that runs on the server hardware and does the job of connecting your internal systems with the ServiceNow instance. Because remember, this is the whole network that you have for your enterprise, right? And your instance, since we are using ServiceNow as a single system of record for your enterprise, you must have the records for all these assets that you have within the enterprise into your ServiceNow instance. So how do you get access to all those assets from within the enterprise, right? You can use mid server to get all those information from the mid from the enterprise. Okay, and then it's a combination of software and hardware. The software is a Java program that runs on a Windows machine as a Windows service or runs on a Linux machine as a Unix daemon. Okay, a script. Let's go and see where we can locate the mid server within our instance. If I go to Application Navigator and type in mid server, I see one application there which is mid server, and it contains several modules, right? Several modules in here. Let's go and click this installation module, and it will take us to the docs.servicenow.com, where it provides you information about the mid server, how to install this mid server, etc. Right? And it says management, instrumentation, and discovery, which is mid server, is a Java server that facilitates communication and movement of data between an instance and external applications, data sources, and services. Right? So this is a connector between ServiceNow instance and external applications, data sources, and services. All new mid servers must be validated before use. We'll see how to validate mid server. That's coming. This ensures that the MIT server is trusted to access credentials used by the instance for automation. Right? We'll see how to do that. Let's look into MIT server requirements. For MIT server system, this is a system requirement for MIT server. You must have a Java version support on the server. It should have Java JRE version 1.8, right? If you upgrade with MIT server using JRE 1.6, the system automatically upgrades the MIT server to version 1.8, right? And then MIT server is supported on 32-bit systems as well as 64-bit systems, right? So the first requirement is to have a Java runtime environment there, and that runtime environment version should be 1.8, right? Now let's see the minimum hardware configuration required. It will require 4 GB of available RAM per application, 2 GHz CPU with a multi-core CPU preferred, 500 MB of disk space per mid server, and can ride along with other services depending on the server utilization and resource availability. Meaning you can have other applications also installed on the mid server system depending upon the server utilization by other programs and mid server and the resource availability of the server, right? And mid server supported systems, it supports Windows Server, and from the Windows Server family it supports Windows Server 2003, 8, 12. It also supports virtual machines, 64-bit systems. Sorry. It supports .NET Framework version 3.5, which is required. Sorry. This is required. .NET Framework version 3.5 is required for service mapping support. And then on Linux machine, it supports virtual machines, 64-bit systems, right? And you must install 32-bit GNU C library, right? This installation from central. This is the command for installation, so we don't have to worry about that. Right, so this is the basic requirement. We will see more specific requirements for different activities, like for server external connectivity requirement, we will have something specific to that. With server internal connectivity requirement, we will have specific to that, and we will have some prerequisites as well. We will see to it later. Now let's look into quickly the pre-installation task. So it says before you can install MIT server on the target computer, you must perform tasks like configuring connection prerequisites, and setting up the MIT server role. So this is basically talking about having within the role module here, you have to go ahead and search for this role, MIT server, right? You must ensure that you have this role in place, right? And there's a reason for it, right? You should not give a user admin access and MIT server role as well, right? We will talk about this. Let's go ahead and see how to install MIT server. When I go here on the MIT server list and I click on downloads, it will give me options to download MIT server program, right? And I have options of Linux 32-bit systems, Linux 64-bit systems, Windows 32 or 64-bit systems. Depending upon what server you have or what system you have, you will pick the software download from here and download it, right? I'm going to take an example of an Ubuntu Linux system that I have. So it's a 64-bit Ubuntu Linux system in Amazon Web Services, AWS. So this is my server hosted here in AWS. right? And I'll be installing the Mint server software here on this Linux server. Okay, so I'll go ahead and hit this 64-bit, or not Windows. I'm sorry. I'll go ahead and hit Linux 64-bit and start downloading. Right. So see, it will automatically pick the right version for your instance. If you are running on Helsinki, see the file here which is being downloaded is mid.helsinki, and rest of the information is available. Likewise, if you're using Galaxy or you are using Fuji or you are using any other version of ServiceNow, when you download the software from here, it will automatically pick the right version for your instance. Now, after you have downloaded this program, you need to port this program, this file, to your Linux instance. Alternatively, what you can do is you can download this file directly on your server. For example, I'm going to the temp directory and I'm going to clean the directory. See, I have only one, two, three, four files here. So alternatively, what we can do is I can go ahead and download this file here. I have already copied the file link from here by right clicking, and I copied the link here, link address. So I can go ahead and download it here, right? So that file is now getting downloaded into the temp directory on my Linux server, and then I can use this directory and this file to install Mint server program on my Linux server. Okay. So get your appropriate version of Linux Mint server from here. Copy that Mint server program to your server where you want to install the Mint server program, and then the process for installing the Mint server will begin. Right, let's see if it is downloaded. Yes, it is. See, I now have mid.helsinki 0316 2006, patch number this. So this is the Mint server program that I have, right? So I'll unzip it here and then bring it to appropriate directory. For the sake of example, I have already created directories and I have installed this program here on my Linux server. I'll show you how I have done that. So I have created the ServiceNow directory, and within ServiceNow directory I have this Mint server folder that I have created, and within this Mint server I have one folder created which is agent, right? And this agent folder now contains all the files that were there in this zip file, right? So basically what I've done is I have unzipped files from this folder, the zip folder that I have here, into the ServiceNow Mint server agent directory. Okay, bring that file, the contents of this zip file, into this directory and then see what it has. I'll clear it. I'll do ls minus ltrh to see the listing of all the files, and then I will see that I have a config.xml file, right? So the installation on the Linux machine is basically to deal with the configuration.xml file that you have created already, that you have into the package that you get from the Mint server download. Okay, so let's go ahead and see what's there in the config file. Or this config file contains a lot of information. some of the comments, some of the parameters that we have here. We need to configure these comments and parameters. Okay? So let's go ahead and see one by one. The first parameter that we have here is the URL parameter. Okay? And this, if you see, the URL value is somehow familiar to us. It's dev11937.servicenow.com, which means this URL parameter will basically be the reference to your instance, the instance URL, right? So you will have this instance URL here in the value attribute of the parameter for URL. That's it, right? You have to type it here. You have to type it and save it. The next parameter that is useful for us is the parameter named as name, the name parameter, right? And the name parameter has the attribute for the name parameter here is, it's the username parameter, and it's mid.instance.username, and you have to find a username for this mid server configuration, right? And this user should be created into your ServiceNow users list, right? So you have to go into user administration, and then you have to create a new user, right? With the configuration that you're going to set here, right? Like in this case, the username that I have is SNC mid server, right? And obviously the instance is this one, so I'll go ahead and use this instance, right? Because we are referring to this instance. So I'll go here. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So this is the instance that I have here in the configuration file. I'll go to the instance, open up the user's listing. When I open up this user listing, I can easily find this SNC mid server user that I have created, right? If we look into the user we have created SNC user ID, see this is active. The user ID is SNC mid server, nothing else. This must have a password that is not getting displayed here. And there are several roles attached to it. One of the roles that it must have is the mid server role, right? And these are the dependent roles. When you import mid server role to this user, when you grant this role, mid server role to this user, the rest of these roles will automatically be populated, right? So the rule of thumb is always create a user and give it the mid underscore server role and save it, right? And once the user is created, go back to the system, use the user ID, and keep the password here in the password field. So this attribute, the password attribute that we have, see here, mid.instance password. Here you have to type in the password that you supplied to this instance, this user here, right? The password value, whatever password value you supplied here, you should be typing in here. Next time when you start the mid server on this server, the password will automatically get encrypted, right? So this is a one-time activity. You have to put your password here, which is a free text, the one that you supplied there in the user creation window, right? The next parameter that you have to supply is the name parameter, which is the name for the mid server instance. And see, I have kept AWS Linux 64 mid server training instance 2. right? So this is the name of the MIT server that I'm going to supply, and this will appear in the list of MIT servers on my instance. So if I go here, and within the MIT server, if I hit servers, I'll see the list of MIT server here. If I have more than one MIT server configured, those will appear here, right? Right now, I have just one MIT server. The status of this MIT server is down, right? Somehow the MIT server is down. We'll see how it is down, right? So four parameters are until now. The first one is the URL parameter. The second one is the username parameter. The third one is the password parameter. The fourth one is the name parameter, which is actually the name of the MIT server instance that will be supplied to MIT server. Now let's see some more parameters, which is essential for us. See this threads.max parameter, and I have left it as default value, which is 25, right? And this parameter is to control the number of execution of threads, the simultaneous activities that this MIT server can do. You can define how many threads you can open simultaneously, right? So for that, you have to put this value. I have left it as blank, default value, right? You can also set this as default value, right? Now next two parameters which gets populated, these are automatically populated when you start the MIT server program, and the values are MIT server sysID. So basically this has a sysID here. So your system will get that sysID from your instance. C6261, see, C6261. So same MIT server sysID will be copied here in this instance and will be populated. Okay. Likewise, this key pairs.mid ID will also be populated automatically. Right? So this is all to have, so you, this is all you need to do into the configuration file that we just saw, right? Once you put these values in here, you will get out of the file. You will save this file and get out, right? That's it. You configure the file, you save it, and then to start this program, see, in Unix you have shell scripts, right? So to start this program, you have to launch this shell script, which is the start.sh, right? To stop this program, you have to refer to stop.sh, okay? And how do we start this program in Unix? You have to be present into the directory in which the start.sh file is, like in this case, the agent directory. And within the agent directory, what you have to do // and start.sh, right? And then you have to hit enter. When you do that, it says starting ServiceNow mid server, waiting for ServiceNow mid server, and then the service was started and the process ID 20261 was associated to the mid server process, mid server program, right? So this mid server has now started, and we already saw that the mid server's reference is there in the mid server listing in this instance, but the status was down because the mid server was not up there, right? So to make this up, let's go ahead and refresh and see, because this instance is up, the mid server instance is up now. So this should now present the correct status. So I'll go ahead and refresh it and see the status has changed to up, meaning we are able to communicate to the mid server that we just configured on a remote Linux server, right? And we are able to make connections to that server, right? When I hit that link, I'll see details about the server. It gives you the internal IP address of the server, which is 172.3.1.51, etc. So it will get some internal IP address from here, this one. See, the IP address of the Linux server is being cascaded to the mid server instance here, and it gets the information here. It also gets the information about the router or router. Let's see where this information is here. This is the broadcast one. This is the hardware mask. So it is getting from somewhere else, which is not there in the if config. So this is getting your router's IP address, it is getting your network IP address, and it is getting a network IP address range. See, 0/20, right? So it's getting a range of IP addresses from the Linux server that you have, right? And it says the last refresh time of this net server is 24/6, 6/24/2016, and at this time, 1905, right? And it was started on this date, okay? Now, since we were talking about validating, because some of the components that we have in ServiceNow that uses mid server, it will not work until you validate the mid server instance, right? So validation is a UI action that is provided, a related link that is provided in the mid server description here, right? If I do invalidate, then I'll be able, and I come back, I'll be able to see that validate button now, right? So to validate a mid server instance, you have to go ahead and hit this validation. Right? When you hit that validate button, it starts validating, and when completed, it will show the status of validation. Validated is yes or false, yes or no. Right? It is now showing that this mid server is validated. Right? You can go ahead and check what script is there in the validate function, or the validate UI action, or the validate related link. Right? So basically, the validate is a UI action, as we talked about, and only agent admins and discovery admins can validate the mid server, right? So this is the UI action that we have written here. It says the condition is it will be available only when the user has gs.has role signifies that the user has role of agent admin and the user has a role of discovery admin. If you have both these roles, then only you will be able to validate the mid server, right? And then it is kicking out this function, which is mid server range.validate function, right? We can see what this validate function is. It should be there somewhere there into the script include mid server manage, and then from this mid server manage we can go ahead and see what this validate function has, right? So this is how you have such information available, right? So since we are talking about mid servers, right, and we are talking about validations, so this mid server will be validated once you hit this validate button. Once it is validated, you will see this validate yes here, and right, and you get all the mid server setup completed for all those components that require validated mid servers. Okay. See, the rekey is to generate a new asymmetric key pair. I really haven't used this rekey functionality, but this one is to get some key value pair that can be used at some places. I'll try to find out why we'll use this rekey function. Okay. Now you can go ahead and hit this grab mid server logs to get logs from the server and see what's happening on the mid server. So it will supply you logs from the mid server, right? So it will give you information about the mid server, different logging about the mid server, right from the Linux instance, right? So you see from remote instance of ServiceNow, you can now control your mid server program, right? If I right click here, see I have different options available. I can restart mid server by firing this command from here, right? So directly from there, I'll be able to restart this program, right? So this is a remote control that you have. You can control your Linux server using the mid server entry that you have created here, right? When you hit this upgrade mid server, it can upgrade the mid server program on the Linux here, right? For example, if this is not a Helsinki version of mid-server that I am using here, but I upgraded the mid-server instance, ServiceNow instance here, so I'll need to upgrade the mid-server instance there. So I can hit upgrade mid-server, and it will automatically start the mid-server program upgrade on the remote server, right? Stuff like that. So it gives you enough control, enough power to manage a remote server, right? And then you can use this mid-server program to connect to external system, external application, interface with those application, interface with those enterprise components or enterprise servers which is not accessible generally outside the firewall, right? So you have to access those components or servers or hardware outside the firewall. Use this mid-server to connect your ServiceNow instance to those within the enterprise systems, right? So this is how we configure the mid server on a Linux PC. Questions? Questions?
So, well,
Yep. Tell me.
okay. Without using Unix or Linux,
Uh-huh.
if you don't have one on your machine,
Mm-hmm.
I know you were trying to do the directory and connect from your own server.
Uh-huh.
How do you go about it? I know we are in training, so probably it will be difficult for us.
Uh, I mean, you are talking about Windows Server or something?
Yeah, yeah.
Right. So, few things that you will have to take care is whatever Windows Server you have, it should be open for the public access, meaning it should not be having it should not be, because ServiceNow instance has to connect to that server, right? So it should be public. It should have a public IP address, right? That this instance can access. So if you have a Windows server that has public IP address, you can install your mid server program on the Windows server, right? And the steps will be mostly the same, but slightly different. So on Windows Server, it will not run as a Unix daemon. However, it will run like a Windows service. Right? If you go to services.msc within Windows Server, so it opens up all the services that is running on this PC, right? And on Windows Server, your mid server program should be installed in the services listed here.
Okay.
Okay? You have to get
Service.
the you have to get the appropriate window mid server program from here. Like you will install this mid server 64-bit version for Windows, and then you will take this file to appropriate directory. The directory could be C // service now /, something like this, right? Right. So you will create a directory here put the files extracted from this 64-bit version of the mid server downloaded from here, and then you have to do the same configuration. Go to the config.xml file. This will also be available for mid server on Windows, right? So go to the config.xml file, supply all those values there, and then you will have to install the batch files, right? In this case, you will not be using the sh files because this is only limited for Linux server. So you will be using these batch files, start bat and stop bat. When you do start.bat file, when you open this one, it will automatically install the services on the net server and on the server, and that will be available for access here in the list, right? You can go ahead and see what is the content of the bat file. If I do vi start.bat, so it is saying that it is going to run a program within the bin directory. Within the bin, it has a mid.bat file, and this mid.bat file is going to be started start the when you start the file there, the start.bat file, right? So there is a bin folder here. See this bin folder? So let's go into bin folder. If I do cd bin and I do ls, within this bin folder I have this mid.bat, right? And these are all Java wrapper classes. So I have this mid.bat now. I can go ahead and look into what this mid.bat file has. And this has all these action files, action items available here, right? You are setting some configurations in this file. So this will be happening automatically. It will automatically pick up the values from the server and install the program there. All you need to do is to hit the start.bat file. When you do start.bat file, it will automatically start the mid.bat file, and within the mid.bat file, it will get the system configuration, the architecture, etc. It will set the values accordingly, appropriately, without any intervention from your side. It will automatically do that and then install the program on your server, Windows server, right? Once installed, see, once this program is installed, you have to go and start it. See, some of these programs are already started. In the status column, you can see some of these programs are started. Some of these are not started. For example, this remote registry. This is not started. To start it, you have to open it and then you have to hit this start button, right? When you do this start button, this program will be started. But then you have to supply the local login information, right? For that, you can use your Windows login ID, login credentials to start the service, right? I'm not able to see this I'm not able to see this start button active right now. That's because I do not have admin privileges on this laptop, this PC that I'm using right now. If I had admin privileges on this PC, I'll be able to start this service right from here, right? So in Windows environment, you will copy your files unzipped from the mid server program that you downloaded into C colon ServiceNow slash agent, and within that agent folder you will open the start.bat file, and the start.bat file will automatically install all the files, necessary files on the server, and then you have to go into the services listing and start the service from there by supplying the user ID and password. That's it, right? And once you do that, your mid server that will then be listed here automatically, right? It will come here automatically.
Mm.
Make sense?
Yeah, okay.
Now, if you remember, when we were doing import sets, I was purposefully leaving the mid server there, right? In the data sources, when we were creating this data source, right? And we chose the type as JDBC, we got this option of use mid server, right? This mid server value will be populated from the mid server listing that we just created. You can go ahead and pick this mid server. Now, since you are supplying this mid server here, using this mid server, you can intrude into the enterprise's LAN and access any of the servers here, right? You'll have to supply the database server name, and you can access that server detail or database server detail. You can even use the database from that server, the one that we just created here. You can use this database and import data from this database using this mid server into your ServiceNow instance. But without mid server, it was not possible because you didn't have public access to this server, right? In this case, in the case of our mid server setup here, we have a public access. You can access this IP address, right? The IP address that I have for this server, even you can access that IP address, meaning this is publicly available. But this database server will not be publicly available to you, right? So that demands for setup of a mid server for you. Okay?
Okay.
You will see the use of mid server more in different other applications. For example, let's talk about export sets. Like we have export sets, import sets, we also, starting from Geneva release, we also have the feature of export sets, right? Export sets are the mechanism that you can use to export data from your ServiceNow instance to outside world, right? But the catch is when you are exporting data, you can only export to your mid servers. And then from the mid server, you can distribute that data to the outside world, right? If I hit this export set link here, it says export sets allow you to push data from an instance to external file. You can export data to remote system using a mid server. So using a mid server, you can push that data file that you are exporting from ServiceNow instance to outside world, right? You must use a mid server from the Geneva release. So this is see, prior to Geneva release, this export set feature was not available. So that's why you have to use this mid server from Geneva release to in order that this export set is configured there, right? Now let's see how we can create an export set. To create an export set, you will hit this create export set link here, and then you will supply the information which is requested, right? It asks for the export set name. For example, I'll name it as sample export set, right? And it is asking what to export. Have you already defined an export definition? No. Let's select a table. So let's select some table which has some data. For example, let's pick the CMDB table. So this is my export definition. I'm just saying where to export. Have you already defined an export target? No. So let's create an export target here, right? So on this web server, I'm going to create export target. So I have already created this folder exports. So I will go ahead and put this path This means that whatever I am exporting from here is to be targeted to be stored at this one, this location on the mid server. I'll submit it. It says export set, sample export set is created. You can use this form to make further changes to sample export set, right? And see, the file name that should be stored on the sample export set will be sample underscore export underscore set dot csv, right? We can add timestamp as well. Let's do the test export 20 records. So that if that directory setup on the Linux server is correct, I'll be able to export the files from this server on that directory location. Let's look into the export log. It says export has started, created an attachment sample export set CSV on mid server attachment table, and then it says transfer sample CSV to the mid server AWS this. Let's go ahead and see if we have this file here. It doesn't have it here. Let's look into. It could be a directory structure issue or permission issue. cd dot dot 555. So it should be given. I think that should be given 777. Yeah. So I now have permitted. I think I'll have to create that SNC ServiceNow user as well, because that user will be sending out data into this instance. I don't know. So let's try one more time. It says it has been transferred. No, it doesn't have the file right now. So it looks like there is some permission issue on this server. I'll have to resolve that permission issue or something. I'll look into. But this is the way of exporting data from ServiceNow in form of a flat file or in form of a CSV file. You go ahead and create an export set, do the export definition, define the export target, and then you can send data out of the ServiceNow instance, right? Then once the export set is created, you can schedule this export set as well. Like we did import set, if you want to do this export on a periodic basis, schedule it. Define the frequency for this export set to run. Let me quickly see into this export history and see what is happening. It looks like it is stuck in ACC queue here, stream pipeline. Yeah, there is some error in the export that we just did. So I'll have to see what that error is. Yeah, it says no sensors defined. So we'll have to resolve this error before that file gets copied to the ServiceNow, to the Linux server here. I'll resolve this and I'll demonstrate it one more time. Okay, right? So we have learned two things. Let me summarize. We have learned how to set up mid servers and what is the use of mid server. Typically, the mid server will be used to access assets from within the enterprise, which is behind the firewall. So you'll set up a mid server either on Windows or Linux to access the resources from within the enterprise, right? And then you can use this mid server to import data from different sources, external sources, or you can export data from ServiceNow instance using mid server to the mid server and then to the outside world. So this is how mid server will be useful. I know that there are other uses for the mid server that we'll be talking about, but to this point, we'll only be talking about import sets and export sets related to mid server, right? When we get to the next level, we'll be talking about instrumentation and discovery as well, where mid server is quite handy. It's very useful to have mid server there, and it will be used in doing this discovery and all. Okay, is it too much to digest today?
That's not for today. Yeah, you have to go and digest it
Yeah,
when you send
yeah,
when you send this to
yeah.
send
So
the report. You have to digest it.
yeah, this is really not difficult, but the thing is that you are not used to it, right? So when you get
Yeah.
used to it, you will understand that this is pretty easy, right? Should not be that much difficult. So so do not panic.